All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Nature Drawing. My name is James Sisti. I'm a professional artist and wilderness guide, and today I'm going to be your instructor. We're going to be working on a couple of different challenges together. The whole point of doing this is to use art as a way to explore nature. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I have a top-down camera where I'm going to be doing all of my drawing. I have my basic materials here, which is all we're going to need for today's class. And when I'm not using my top-down camera, I'm going to be sharing a slideshow here. So let's get started, shall we? Today's class, we're going to talk about our goals. We're going to go over what kind of materials are best to use when you're not working from home, when you're on a hike or in a nature setting. We're going to give you some prompts to get started because after all, we're going to be learning something today, but that's by no means a reason to not keep going. I want you to keep drawing even after this workshop. So there's some good prompts for you there. We'll be participating in a warm-up exercise together. And we're also going to be trying a couple of different techniques for landscape drawing and also for rapid sketching in a nature environment. So although we aren't in the wilderness together right now, I did the best that I could for finding good resources for us to use on the computer. And hopefully that'll help you in your adventures when you try to draw out in nature on your own. So the first thing I want to discuss is our goals, right? As artists, right, we're essentially taking in everything that we're seeing from the world, interpreting it and filtering it and putting it onto paper, right? And instead of it just being about making pictures though, really what we're accomplishing is that we're establishing a connection with nature, right? And we're opening ourselves up to things that we may not have noticed. We're learning about things that we may not have known before. And the best part is we get to share what we learn with other people through our artwork. So this is a very positive habit to form. It feeds into itself because the longer you draw, the more time you spend drawing, the better you get, and the more fun it gets too. So that's where we're really coming from as we approach our practice today. And really, we're using very simple, really simple materials for today's class. And it's pretty much the same for me when I'm working outside of my home and I'm actually in a wilderness setting. I usually bring my sketchbook, a pencil, and maybe a fountain pen. And that's it, really, because I want to use the things that I'm very comfortable with. I don't want to carry around a lot of extra things that I may not use. And overall, if I want to do something special like watercolor or painting or colored pencils, that's all extras. That's all stuff, bonus materials that we can bring with us if we have the intention of using them, right? So you don't need to make a large investment in art supplies is what I'm getting at. So in order to get started, I'd recommend it to keep it personal, right? Everybody has different preferences. And if you're interested in plants, for example, other people may be interested in birds and insects and landscapes and other things. Just find an area of focus that excites you and interests you and make that really where you're channeling your creative energy from. And if you're somebody like me who likes to collect specimens and things, like leaves, feathers, and other objects, shells on the beach, always follow the right ethics by not killing or damaging a living organism. And finally, as you're hiking and as you're out there in a nature setting, it's always good to keep your tools handy and to always be ready to draw and take notes and whenever the opportunity presents itself. So we're going to get started on our first warm-up exercise together. At this point, you should be, have your pencils sharpened and your paper ready. And I'm going to go over a couple of little techniques to help you draw nature objects. And I really recommend this as a practice. When you draw a 3D object versus a 2D from a 2D reference, it's a real difference. So after class today, use the skills to give it a shot on your own. Okay, so the reference photo I sent everybody looks like this. This is a conch shell. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using this reference as a way to guide us in creating an accurate representation of an image, right? So I'm going to switch off the slideshow really quick, and you should see your reference that I sent to you. We have a couple of people that are joining in right now. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to prepare my drawing surface, and it's just a regular piece of computer paper that I am going to fold in half, just like this. And the reason why I fold it in half is because as we are warming up, right, we're going to use less materials, and it's also easier to warm up with a smaller drawing. So first thing I like to do when setting up my drawing is to create a box or a margin where my drawing is going to basically be inside. And all of the other things that I'd like to add, let's say maybe the date or other pieces of information, I can write in the margins rather than on the drawing. But sometimes it's cool to write on the drawing as well. Okay, so it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. A simple rectangle will do. And what we're going to do next is we're going to consider the reference material. Again, you should have seen that in the email that I sent. And it's also in the chat if you're just joining us now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by considering the proportions of the object. Since it's a conch shell, really, if it's the size of, let's say, this cowrie right here, that's pretty tiny. So I may want to adjust the proportions of this nature object. So what I'm going to do to make it bigger is I'm going to start by plotting. And what I'm going to do is put one dot, which will represent the tallest point of the object, okay? And another dot, which will represent the lowest point of the object. And this together will signify its width, right? And again, since we're working inside of a box, I don't want to really exceed the dimensions of the box itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to put two dots that will represent the length, right? So by figuring the length and the width beforehand, what I'm going to be able to accomplish is I will have successfully blown up or made bigger the nature object, and it will also be in proportion, okay? So as I begin this drawing, feel free to follow along. If it's a little bit quick, don't worry about it. We're recording this workshop, so you can always rewatch it later and draw at a slower pace if that's what you like. So everybody in this group can draw a dot. It's the easiest, most simple form of mark making. And why I incorporate mark making in this nature is because what we're doing is we're going to create a blueprint, kind of like an architect creates blueprints for a construction project. And we're going to design our drawing before we actually start a drawing. And the way that I accomplish this is by creating a profile or outline of the object that I'm drawing. So I'm starting from the outside, not the inside. And I'm going and I'm carefree in my dot making, but I'm also creating something that I'm going to draw on top of, right? So don't worry about there being a lot of dots on the page. You won't even see them by the time we get to the drawing phase. So I'm just dancing around with my pencil here, making nice light dots, okay? And this is going to, again, trace the outline of the object itself, so that when we get to the drawing part, we're going to have a more accurate, proportionate rendering, okay? Doesn't look like much right now, and that's okay, because this is going to be the outline of our nature object. So once you accomplish this part, right, we're going to start by filling in some information using the same technique. For example, there's an opening of the conch shell that we need to account for. And really, the way that this shell kind of folds back on itself so elegantly is a great place for us to start, because it's sort of located in a central area of the object. And if you get enough practice in, you start seeing how you can measure things by using the object itself as a individual unit of measurement. What I mean is, if I can see in the middle of the object where a certain feature begins, such as this fold that leads to the opening of the hole, That will allow me to measure the correct proportion of this opening. And when I get to the part where I'm actually plotting it out with my dots, I'm very confident that this is going to be exactly where it needs to be. Okay. And it's an unorthodox style. It really isn't something that you would find in a academic class. But again, everybody here possesses the ability to draw dots, and it's the simplest form of mark making. So if you're getting used to simplifying complex things and making it about just the very simplest form of mark making, dots, you're not going to be intimidated. You're going to be able to plan your drawing accordingly, just like we're doing together right now. And then you're going to be able to start your drawing. Okay. So at this point, I have a pretty decent idea as to what my drawing is going to look like. Okay. I haven't started my drawing yet. This is just planning. When I begin my drawing, I'm going to start by connecting the dots. So the safest bet is to start with the underside of this shell. And it has a texture to it, so it's almost like a ribbed texture. So I don't have to trace over the dots perfectly. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm treating them more like guides. And I'm drawing over them, I'm drawing around them. We can get rid of those later with our eraser. But for the most part, it's all of the hard work is already done because I've figured all of the dimensions and proportions that I need in order to render a realistic shell. So the nice thing about these particular objects is when you're collecting shells, for example, it's no longer, hopefully no longer containing a living organism. So it's a great specimen to collect because they are almost infinite in abundance, right? And you find them washed up on the seashore, given if you live near the ocean. And it's a very low impact way to collect nature specimens, right? For people who don't live near the ocean, another idea is right now it's autumn and a lot of trees are losing their leaves. And it's a great idea to go and find those beautiful reds and oranges um, just on the ground. And you're not disturbing any living organism by doing that. Sometimes I collect specimens in books. So I'll take leaves and I'll press them and I'll keep them in good condition so that I can draw from them later. And again, the whole point of using a 3D object versus a 2D object, like a flat picture, is it's just a different experience. It teaches you to look at a three-dimensional object and think about a three-dimensional object while you're doing your drawing. And working from photos like we're doing right now is perfectly fine, but I challenge you to give it a shot. It's a really good way to exercise your artistic eye and to get used to drawing things from real life, because that's what this is all about. We want to make sure that we're practicing and we're getting our skills right to the point where we can take them outside and spend some time in nature drawing from nature. Okay, so I've just done a basic outline of the object, right? And you can still see the dots that I placed down earlier, right? You can still see them here. And that's okay. We don't have to worry about those until the very end. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to start with this interior space. And I'm noticing that if I were to begin on this side, in this section of the shell where that opening is, I would really like to make sure that I'm starting at the correct point, which is about a few centimeters from the edge of the shell. Okay, so I start just like this. And look at that elegant curve. It's so smooth. Okay. And I'm going to stop right here where my dots are because this is the other opening of the shell. This is where the two planes are meeting, right? And a plane in artistic terms, Plane, a plane represents a flat surface on a three-dimensional object. Okay, so when I mention that term, plane, I'm not talking about the vehicle that we fly around in. What I'm talking about is this surface, a surface meeting another surface. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just guiding myself with these little dots from earlier. So again, the hard part was setting up the drawing. Now what we're doing is we're keeping a pretty nice and consistent line as we connect the dots, so to speak. And that way we're making a pretty good representation of this object that we have in front of us. Now, one thing that I'd love to teach you is a little bit about line weight. What do I mean by line weight? I'm simply discussing the thickness of the line, right? It's very uniform what I have on my page right now. Every line is the same thickness, and therefore there is no line weight variation, okay? So how do you know when to add a thicker line? I look to see where there are shadows, and really that's where you want to add thicker lines. And I'll show you in a moment. Think of it like this. In the absence of light, there is a shadow, right? So if, for example, our object is resting on a table and our light source is coming from above, everything underneath would be shadowy. So naturally what I would do is I would consider creating a thicker line just like this. I'm not pressing very hard, just a little bit harder, where the shadow is going to be, right? So if, for example, I go ahead and I add just a little bit of extra line weight to certain areas, okay, and I'm noticing because it's a ribbed texture, maybe it'll come only into those little crevices there. But immediately you can see the difference in line weight. And what this is telling the viewer of your drawing is that there is shadow down here, that this is darker, it's heavier, right? Same thing over here. You know, we have this nice elegant curve that comes in, but what about this top part? Because inside the shell, it's a little bit darker than outside the shell. So what I would do, and you can always turn your drawing, you don't have to always have it facing the same direction. What you can do is just add a little bit of line weight, just like this. And now you are telling the viewer that there is some shadow happening inside of this area here. We haven't even begun shading yet. This is just a great way to communicate something like that without having to go and do all of that work. We'll get to that in a little bit though. Okay, another nice thing is being able to reorganize. Let's say, for example, if a line was a little bit over here, you can always just redraw it on top of the previous line without really worrying about erasing too much. And that way you're focusing on drawing and making marks rather than erasing and removing marks. Okay? And just like that, we have a very basic sketch of a conch shell, right? So a little bit earlier, I had mentioned perhaps adding information or notes onto a drawing. And that's really why I like to include these margins. So the first piece of information that I generally add is the date in which I'm doing the drawing. So today is the 10th of October, 2020. And that immediately puts a timestamp on when I did this sketch. So we're not going to be so much interested in just the date, right? We're going to be more so interested in what this object is and where did it come from. So for example, if I write in this section here, the subject of the drawing, I can write, this is a conch shell. And correct me if I'm spelling it wrong, but I think that's correct. And adding the location where I found it, let's pretend that we're in Hawaii together, that we're all on a nice vacation in Hawaii. So let's say we are on, let's pick Maui. Just magically transport us all to Maui right now. That wouldn't be too bad, right? Okay. So what this is now done is it's identified the object, it's placed a time stamp on the object, and it's also linked it to a location. Now this is what we all call baseline data, right? Because another thing we can do, for example, if I have, let's pretend this is the conch shell, it's a cowrie, but if I have my measuring tool, I can measure this tool, and this is an empiric system, so we're going to use inches for today's exercise. So this is about 2 inches long by 1.25 inches wide. Because I had adjusted the proportions of this sketch, it's not drawn to scale. Drawn to scale means you've drawn it at the exact same size. So because it's not drawn to scale, I'll include the measurements like this. Okay. 2 inches by 1.25 inches. And you could use centimeters, millimeters, whatever system you're familiar with is totally fine. So now what I've done is I've added yet another layer of information into this drawing. So now people will understand it's not drawn to scale. People will understand what it is, where it's from, and when I found it. Anything else you add into the drawing is just going to make it more interesting and more exciting for people to look at. So even with this basic line drawing that we did for our warm-up, it's now something that is more than just a sketch or a pretty picture. It's actually a story, and you're able to share this with people by putting it online, or even just taking, if you have your sketchbook, keeping them all in the same place. And it's a nice catalog of your experiences in nature. Okay. So you don't have to, but if you're interested, I'd love to see if anybody drew along and if they would like to share their sketch with us. And also don't forget to unmute your microphone so I can hear you. Who would like to go first? Let's start with, so here, all right.
Hi, that's mine for a very basic one.
Hey, very good. That's a good start.
Thank you.
Nice. You got some good line weight variation there.
Thank
and you even got your notes. Perfect. Nice job. Beth, you want to share yours? Nice job, Beth. Very good. Nice. Did you find the dots helpful? Yeah?
Very, very, very.
Awesome. That's the whole point. We want to make sure that we're not intimidated when we see something that we, oh, Shan, you want to share?
Yeah, here's mine.
Nice. Perfect. Great to see you back in class, Shan.
Mormon? Good to be back.
All right. Who else would like to share theirs before we move on to the next exercise? Okay. Cool. So what we're going to be doing next is we're going to do another drawing together as a class. This time we're going to be building upon the lesson we just used together, we just learned together, and we're going to be applying that to a different subject. So the subject we are going to be applying to is landscapes. We are going to be drawing an awesome landscape together in pencil. And we're going to go over a couple of things. Like I said, we're going to be building on the things we used, the lessons we've learned during the warm-up, but we're also going to be working on establishing a visual hierarchy, right? And I'm also going to teach you how to use mark making in another way in order to fill in different details.
Well, you could sell yourself $65 from me.
Hey guys, I'm just going to put you on mute. Make sure that your microphone's on mute so that we accidentally don't talk in front of the class like that. Sorry. All right. So, so we're going to talk about establishing visual hierarchy. Cool. So the idea is, as we begin to contemplate what we're about to draw, right, we're going to focus on maybe a single object or multiple objects, and then everything else in the drawing isn't as important in terms of priority, right? So the focus of the drawing should have, you should invest the most time into it, because you want to render those details and make sure that the viewer is aware that what the focus of your drawing is. So here we have a photograph that I took of Mount Rainier in Washington. And if you've been in my classes before, you've seen this, this helpful template. Essentially, this is a photograph that I took of flowers, and it just happens to have a mountain behind it, right? You can see that the flowers are in focus, but everything else is out of focus. And that's kind of how we want to think about our drawing, right? If we are faced with a lot of information, let's say we only want to draw one flower in the garden, we can draw and spend all of our time rendering that one flower, and then spend just a little bit less time rendering the other flowers. And the viewer will know this is a drawing of a, you know, of a lily rather than of all the plants that are surrounding it, okay? So for example, this is a mountain drawing that we did in class 2 nights ago. And the focus of this drawing is the mountain. So, right, it's the inverse of what we just saw on that template. There are trees, there are other mountains, but I didn't spend so much time rendering trees. Instead, what I did was I put most of my time rendering the rocky terrain of the mountain. And that way, it's very clear that this is meant to be a visual experience surrounding mountains, right? So next, we're going to take our second template here. We have our landscape template. A couple of helpful tips there too on the side you can go by. But again, this is something that I sent via email. So this is a resource that you can just download and have ready on the side. And I'm going to switch back to my top-down camera. So just to quickly recap, we had a process for building our warm-up drawing. We're going to stick to that same process with our landscape today. And basically what we have going on here is, again, we're going to start by creating our margins, drawing our rectangle. Just like this. Alrighty. And here is what we're going to start our construction process, our architecture process. We're going to base it on what we call quadrants. So what's a quadrant? I'm going to divide this rectangle into 4 equal parts by just very, very faintly, lightly drawing a line down the center. I've divided it into 2 equal parts. And now maybe even shifting that over a little bit so it's more accurately in the center. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat the same but across vertically, and now I'm going to have 4 equal parts or quadrants. Okay, and I do it very, very lightly so I can erase it later and it's not going to cause any problems. So the reason why I divide it into 4 equal parts is because we're about to embark on drawing a pretty complicated landscape, right? So again, if the simplest mark we can make is a dot, right, then that's us basically simplifying mark making down to that most basic point. Now, simplifying a landscape is kind of like that. We're going to use dots, of course, but we're also going to break it down into equal parts because that way we'll be able to draw a little bit at a time and it's not as overwhelming. So I'm going to go ahead and start by just considering what's happening in each quadrant, right? If I were to draw a line down the middle of the page horizontally, I'll know that it has mostly some grassland with spruce trees on top of it, right? The sky is very cloudy and stormy, and it looks like it's kind of getting brighter in the middle. Again, we're looking at our reference photo. But how is this information going to help me when I need to start this drawing, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to find the quadrant that feels the most easy to draw. And that would be this quadrant right here, because it contains grass, water, and a reflection. Basically, that's it. So if I were to make a mark, I could start by measuring about 1 inch or so from the rightmost margin and from the bottommost margin. And this is where I know I'm going to start drawing my grass, because this patch of grass will actually continue to about the middle of the page right here. So now I'm using my margins as a measurement system, because I also know that the grass is about this tall, okay? So I know that it won't go above this height. So now, how do I draw all this grass, okay? What I can show you is, just to use the back side of this paper really quick, when I invite people to draw grass, usually I see something that looks like this, okay? And it's a pretty straightforward series of vertical lines. Instead, I'd invite you to consider a different approach. Maybe hold the pencil like this in an underhand position. And that way, what you can do is very, very lightly, you can use the whole side of the pencil here. Very lightly and gingerly, just start making marks like this. They all don't have to be the same height. They all don't have to be the same thickness. It can be very loose and wild, just like grass. Okay? And this way, what you're doing is you're avoiding this very mechanical, unnatural type of mark making, and you're really freeing yourself up to just enjoy the randomness in which grass grows. Now, in order to make this look more convincing, what I like to do is I find the tip of certain grass blades, and I'll go ahead and I'll make a bunch of dots on the top of it, just like this. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a visual effect that is similar to what the wild grass actually looks like. Okay? And you don't have to do that for every single blade, just the ones that you want to be prominent, right? If there are some that are down here, some that are over here, you'll be able to demonstrate which way the grass blades are bending by giving them a little hat on the top with those dots. Okay? And over the course of your drawing, be sure to include those types of details, because that's essentially following a system that nature has put in place here, right? So when we try to draw things also like a tree, and again, if you've been in my classes before, you've seen this demonstration. Essentially, when we look at these trees, they're triangle in shape. And most of the time I see people start drawing trees like this, like it's a popsicle. That's not really what we're looking at, though. Instead, what I invite you to consider is the same idea as our nature object. You put a dot on the page for the top of the tree, and you put a dot on the bottom here for the bottom of the tree. And this is going to be the length of our tree in general. You're also going to want to consider that it has a lot of different branches on either side. Again, sometimes I even see people draw a tree like this. Okay, which we're getting, if we're thinking about the principle, it's the correct principle, but the wrong execution. Instead, when I consider a tree, what I do is I can hold the pencil differently, or I can hold it whatever way I want, just like that. And I'm going to be very loose, and I'm going to observe the alternating arrangement that I'm seeing on these branches here. Okay, and I'm leaving places blank on purpose, because guess what? Our imagination is going to fill in the gaps there. Just you watch. You don't need to draw a trunk. Just consider the way that the branches are arranged, just like that, how they're spaced, how they're alternating like that. Okay? And eventually, once you get towards a certain point to the bottom, you can either draw a trunk like this, or you can bring these branches all the way down. Okay? Usually these trees, if we're looking at these types of spruce trees, since they're growing near water, since they're exposed, they want to use more branches. They don't have to waste energy growing a trunk too tall, because guess what? If they're standing by themselves by the edge of edge of a lake, they will maximize their food making process by growing more branches than by injecting all that energy into a trunk, right? The reason why the trees will grow taller is because they're competing for sunlight. So if we have some smaller trees surrounding this larger tree, that will account for why it's going to be taller. Okay? So consider these forms of mark making when we get to draw our grass, when we get to draw our tree. In that way, we'll be able to really fly through this sketch and come up with something that looks really accurate. Okay? So I'm going to start with this quadrant here. Remember, we're not going to go higher than this line here with our grass. And I'm just going to start by playing. I'm just going to randomly hold my pencil like this. I'm just going to randomly make marks that are following the way the grass is bending, right? You can imagine the way that they sway in the wind. Maybe if snow falls on them, they'll get packed down really, really densely. And we have a little gap here too. It's about 1/4 of an inch. So I can make a little mark here, and this is where that second patch of grass is going to grow. And really, again, we're using the margin that we created as a measuring tool and giving ourselves a little bit more of an advantage when planning our drawing out, right? We're not using dots to plot out a perimeter of an object yet, but when we get up into the trees, that's going to be something that we fall back on for sure. Okay, and remember, if you want it to look a little bit more convincing, try to make them, the grass blades, different sizes, bend in different directions, and even giving them a little cap like this, just like that with the dots, will help it feel a little bit more realistic. Okay, and you can highlight some by just making them a little bit darker. Remember line weight variation. And that way, we're constructing something that is following the system nature put in place, right? So we're just going to put little dots on the tops of some of these. Again, you don't have to put them on all of them. And just bring a couple more out forward, just like this. Okay, leaving some of them a little bit lighter so that we get that nice variation of line weight. And I always like to leave a little spot to put my initials in the corner, so I'm going to leave that blank. Okay, so I'm just going to continue just like this, putting these little hats on top of the grass blades. And there's some of them that are folded down like that. Maybe that'll be a nice addition to our cluster here. We're going to get to a portion where the grass is actually all bent down in the same direction. That could be because of the way in which the winds prevail. It could be because the water levels are higher and it's starting to, submerge parts of the grass. It might also just be because snow just melted and everything is still kind of pushed down. So it's really great to understand the reasons for why things act the way they do in nature. And if you think about this kind of stuff while you're drawing, it'll open up other questions. And that's a great prompt for you to go and do some research and find out why certain things do what they do out in the world. And really, by following the system that we've been putting in place here, we're taking a lot of complex information and simplifying it. And rather than biting it off in one big chunk, we're biting off smaller, more digestible pieces, let's say. So there's another grass island, since we're working from left to right, now let's work up, that's about 1 inch higher than this grass down here. And again, you can feel free to add those little hats too if it makes you feel good. Okay, so we have this cluster of grass that's going to be probably pushing a little bit higher than the middle point of our drawing, but that's okay because only certain parts of that are going to, let's say, breach where the land is across the water, right where those trees are growing. Right, so we have grass growing in different directions. Remember, nice light strokes, different directions. Okay, we have another patch over here that's kind of growing near that. So I'm just gonna very quickly jot that down so I don't forget it. But again, since these things are very simplified forms, add some of those dots onto the top so that it actually feels like real grass. helps to create a context, really. Okay. So there's a lot of reflective light. There's a lot of reflections happening. We're not going to worry about those too much right away. Instead, what we're going to do is we are going to focus on just filling in the other details in this landscape first, then worry about the reflections. So at this time, I'm just going to come back here and I'm going to look and see where I'm going to start next. We did our second quadrant, we did our third quadrant first, and then we moved into our fourth quadrant. So now let's consider what's happening in the first and third over here. What's happening in these two quadrants, right? So obviously we have the grass, we have some reflections, but also the land mass starts and ends kind of here. Okay, so I'll put a dot here, a little dash, to help me measure the length of that landmass. It goes to about the center of the page. And check this out. Whenever you draw something that is on a body of water or a reflective surface, what you should do is really figure on the different curves and the different inlets and outlets that are happening there. Okay, and then what you're going to do is to give it another line, maybe even using little dashes like this, because this is going to help it feel more like a reflection. Okay, little dashes like this, or softer lines like that. Okay, because now it actually feels less like a line and more like something that actually has some bearing, right? Now we have a group of trees growing on top of this island, but before we do that, we're just gonna figure also where this goes. It kind of hooks back this way before it hits the first tree, all right? And we have some trees as well that we're gonna account for, because if we look at this margin, we made a dot for where the bottom of that landmass is going to be. And maybe we can do the same for the top, right? Looks like we're gonna have, you know, some grass growing. And remember the way that we did the grass, you're gonna do it exactly the same, just way smaller over here. And then we get a little top-down view as well, all right? And this top-down view is gonna be the borderline of where the grass meets the trees. So if I consider what the ground looks like before it meets the trees, what I'm going to do is really what I liken to a Richter scale is I'm going to make a very squiggly line, just like this. Very irregular, random, and loose. And the reason why is because you're going to basically be distinguishing a border between a grassy a grassy outcropping of land and these big old trees, okay? So now I'm gonna look to see where from this spot the tallest tree is, okay? And that's somewhere around here. This is about as tall as those trees are gonna get. This is the tallest of all the trees. Okay, and if I work my way from this side to this side, I can start building up using that dot technique that we used earlier, right? And all I'm doing is I'm giving myself a guideline for where I'm going to draw the trees on top of, right? We're not trying to draw the trees with dots. We're just accounting for the different spaces that they occupy by putting dots there right now. Again, we're going to draw right on top of them. So don't get married to them. Don't worry about it. We're going to pretty much, they're going to be completely eliminated in a few minutes. And you're also going to account for the trees that are growing in front of other trees, okay? Because we have rows of trees growing in front of each other and surrounding each other. And if you build it like this, what you're doing is you're giving yourself a good way to differentiate the different areas where light is hitting. So you're going to give yourself more visual depth, and you're going to be able to account for the values that you're seeing, the light values that you're seeing a little bit better. Okay. So this kind of just looks like a mishmash mess of dots, but what I'm going to do with these dots is really what we did on the backside of our paper here, right? We're going to be drawing trees. Okay. And again, we're not going to be drawing a straight line. We're not going to be drawing a trunk and putting little twigs on them, or we're not going to be doing a rectangle with a popsicle stick. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use our dots, okay? Let's say, for example, this is the tree that we just made with dots. We're going to essentially start by creating that very first initial mark like this and just alternate down the tree, okay? Sometimes trees have broken branches, sometimes trees have irregular branches, so don't worry if it doesn't feel right immediately. What you're going to do is you're going to first provide the viewer with a realistic representation of what this tree looks like in a wild environment. And then you're going to be able to revisit it. What do I mean by revisit it? I'm going to do exactly what I said. I'm going to start by alternating left and right, all the way down the tree. I'm going to be noticing which way the branches are drooping, if they're facing towards us, away from us, etc. And there's a lot of white space that I'm intentionally leaving blank, okay? So the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm not done yet, right? There's areas here that I can fill in with further details. And you can do that with dots, you can do that with lines, you can do that any which way. But you're really considering it as a three-dimensional object with alternating branches. And you're letting other people's imaginations fill in the blanks. Because this is a tree, without a doubt. Anyone who looks at this will say, tree. Okay. And even you don't even need to add a little trunk like I just did. You can leave it totally blank, just like that, and it's still believable as a tree. Okay, so let's try that on our landscape here. I'm gonna flip over again. And again, I'm gonna start with the tallest tree, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and start by creating that nice alternating arrangement. And sometimes if your pencil gets a little dull, it's hard to do this. So I'm just gonna quickly sharpen my pencil and get a nice sharp point for this because I really wanna make sure that I'm getting fine detail. Okay. And if you don't like sharpening pencils, mechanical pencils work just fine. Okay, got my handy sharpener there. Okay, so now that I have a sharper point, I'm now going to be able to execute this drawing. Yes, definitely more effectively here. And some of these trees, the branches grow like wagon wheels in a whorled arrangement, W-H-O-R-L-E-D. Right? It's good to understand that because if we understand the behavior of trees or how they grow, then we're going to be able to draw them better, right? Notice how these branches are kind of lifted in an upward way. If you're drawing your branches flat, then you're not following what nature is showing you. You're drawing what you want to see, not what you're actually seeing. Okay, so just keep that in mind too. If you have an instance where trees are standing on top of each other, that's okay. You can give it a little bit of a trunk just to show that it's a different tree. Okay. But again, they're basically all part of the same forest, so it doesn't matter if they're right on top of each other just like this. People will understand that multiple trees are in this area. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly do the back row first because once we get in front of this row, we're going to have to do the middle row and then the front row. And this is going to be repeated across the rest of this drawing here. Okay. And you don't have to get too crazy with the details further back. Remember visual hierarchy? Remember we were talking about that earlier? This is a great opportunity to practice that because we want to give a lot of information about what's happening in the foreground. The background can kind of be our faded image, right? We don't have to worry too much about that background. And I'm just going to quickly account for the trees that are on this side as well. I can start by measuring from this side, right? It's not going to be as tall as this tree because it's the tallest tree. So maybe I'll start about this height and I'll begin by plotting out where these trees are hanging out together. They're all buddies. They've known each other a long time. And there we go. I'm just going to quickly get that information down on the paper. Okay. because the rest of the sky is blank. And again, the reflections we'll worry about later. All right. So what I'd like to do is quickly and accurately render these trees. So once you get good at this, and once you can sort of figure the way in which a tree is naturally growing and positioning itself, you're going to have an easier time of doing it. So don't worry if it's not coming very naturally right now. It takes practice and direct observation. That's the key word, direct observation. Go outside after class or on your break or whatever at work. Go outside with a little piece of paper and a pen or pencil and just look at how the trees grow. Look at the way that their branches are arranged. Are they opposite? Are they whorled? Are they alternating? And consider the way that leaves grow on branches as well. You'll notice that they all have different characters and different characteristics. Okay, and it's really just about noticing what's happening out there and not inventing ways for trees to grow, but just recording the way that they're actually growing. Okay, we've got a nice little bunch right over here, very tightly knit together. And I'm going a little faster than I normally would just because we have a time limit. So I definitely want to make time for the next exercise. So if you don't finish your drawing in class, don't worry. Again, I'll be sending a recording so that you'll be able to finish it after at your own pace and you won't feel rushed or pressured or anything like that. Okay, so we have our background trees on this side here. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and teach you a little bit about silhouetting as well. Okay, so what's a silhouette? Silhouette is essentially an outline of an object, right? So when we began drawing our nature object here, we created a silhouette first, all right? And then we filled in the details. Sometimes you can use that to create a more striking feature. Like for example, this little tree that's directly by itself in the front, if we silhouette it and we don't draw the interior, right? It looks like a regular Christmas tree this way. It's going to play on that visual hierarchy thing we were talking about earlier, right? Because we're going to have a middle row that we're doing now. We don't want those middle rows to be lost, okay? So what we could consider is how they're growing and create an outline to represent them. Because we filled in all the details for the trees in the background. That's where the least amount of light is. So in these areas that we fill in darker, we're going to have to contrast that with an area that is lighter. And the way we do that is by silhouetting these trees. You can always fill some information into the silhouette after you've done them, but I just want you to consider how the silhouette looks on its own first before we do that. We may leave it, we may add stuff to it. It's totally up to you. Right? As the artist, you have the license to show what you want to show, how you want to show it. Okay, so we have the second row of trees here. Try not to get caught up in making them look too triangular. I know that's the basic shape that we see when we look at these conical trees, but if you make them just a little bit narrower or a little bit more irregular in their arrangement, you'll have a better result. You'll have a more believable tree. Okay, and we're just going to repeat that just like this. All the way across. And we know because there's some stuff happening over here, we want to fill this in to be, whoops, want to fill this in to be a little bit more dark. So I'm just going to add in some more foliage there in that particular spot. And maybe one more tree here. It's not in the picture, but it just feels like a tree should go there, right? Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in these little front guys. And again, I'm going to use another silhouette technique, right? Except this time, what I can do is if I fill in more information, right, that'll help it feel more like a tree. So I'll silhouette it, but I'll add a little bit of information in the middle, a little bit of information here and there. Maybe this one has a little brother too, we'll put there. There you go, they look after each other. Okay. We have another tree right here in the front. And what you're doing is, again, you're creating rows. You have a back row, a middle row, and a front row. And by creating a darker back row, you'll need a middle row that contrasts with it, right? So that's why it's silhouetted. And then we'll need something to contrast with the silhouetted row. So that's why we're back to filling in these trees in the foreground. Okay. Now, if it feels weird that they're blank, you can darken it instead, and it'll still be a silhouette. But I just want to leave it light for now so that I can make up my mind about that later. You want to give yourself time to think when you're drawing. That's another great avenue for meditation here, is thinking while drawing. If you're working on a really long project, you're going to be doing a lot of thinking about what you're looking at, and you're going to be asking questions and wanting to know answers, and it's just a great habit to form. Okay. Just like that. And if areas feel kind of blank, don't worry about that for right now. We'll get back there in a little bit. I just want to make sure that this grass area in the front is filled in nicely too. Nice and loose. Just like in the front, nice and loose and a little bit random. And the best part is we're not painting, we're not using any kind of expensive mediums here. Anybody can do this. Sometimes I just like to add some dots in the water to help sell that reflection. Okay, so now I'm going to repeat the same, but on this side, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to outline that landmass here. I'm also going to notice it falls kind of short from the center of the page. It kind of just winds up over here, wraps in on itself until it hits the trees, just like around here. So I'm going to go ahead and add that little extra lighter line, dash, dot, dot, dash. Okay. And add that grass in. Now, I'm going to make some of these bigger blades in the foreground a little bit darker because we're going to lose them if they poke up above the land, because that's going to be shaded in just like this with the grass. So just maybe revisit some of that grass in the foreground. Add some more of those dots to give them hats. Here we go. And don't make them all the same line weight. Like really break it up a little bit, vary it, try different things. Makes it feel more believable. I tend to bounce around in my drawings. I never really stay in the same place for too long. It's kind of just a nice benefit of all that exciting scenery. You get to explore it all at once, different areas. Okay. So at this point, I have pretty much laid out the way the trees are going to go. And afterwards, I'm going to go ahead and very, very quickly fill in these tall trees in the back. This looks like it has two hanging out together just like that. And if your pencil's losing its tip, it's time to resharpen, don't worry. It's better to work with tools that work for you rather than tools that work against you. So make sure you keep sharpening your pencil if you need to. Okay, there we go, that's better. Get those alternating branches in there. We have a skinny looking person right over here in the back. Skinny tree. Branches pointing upwards like that. And then the skinny tree has two neighbors, two tall neighbors. Maybe they're about this high. So I'm going to start by working my way down from the top, just like before. Alternating, alternating. Branches pointing upwards, leaving some blank spaces in between so that we can fill them in later with dots or marks that allow our viewers' imagination to take over. Okay, and if they're arriving close next to each other, then we can accommodate for that, no problem. And another trick is if, for example, you're working in pencil and you don't want to smudge your drawing, you can take a piece of scrap paper like I have over here, and you can put it on top of your drawing, and that way you'll protect it from any smudging. Okay. This tree is very symmetrical, so I'm going to change that a little bit so it looks a little less symmetrical. There we go. Okay, and that back row of trees is almost done. Got about 2 inches worth of trees left. Okay, we have another one over here that I'm going to add in. I didn't account for it earlier with the dots. That's fine. You can always make additions and improvements as you go. That's another part of the beauty of it. It's not a photograph, it's a drawing. And you're the one who's in control of it. Okay, we got that back row pretty much completed for the most part. A couple more of these trees here. Just ignoring some of the dots that I put down earlier because I didn't put them in the right place. Not a big deal. Moving and grooving. Here we go, one more. Perfect. So I'm gonna make you here. Okay. So this guy, I just want to use this as a measuring tool as well. I want to make sure that my island is as long as it needs to be. So I actually need to extend it a little bit, just like this. And no need to erase or worry about it too much. All right. We're going to draw some trees right up on here, so won't even notice it. I'm just going to start with a little silhouette of a tree here because that's going to begin that middle row that we were talking about. Actually, this one's in the front row. And it's going to have some land behind it, just like this, that I'm going to use with dots to plot out. And all of the trees that go in that background area are fine just as little silhouettes that we can shade in, because those will be the darkest since they're the furthest away. So I'm just going to get those background trees accounted for. I'm just going to be really quick about it too, because I know we're running out of time. Again, you can rewatch this later at your own leisure. Don't feel like you need to race against me. This is a little bit faster than I normally work, so I don't always draw at breakneck speed. It's just because of the time that we have, that's all. All right, so this will be the background trees. Okay. Maybe the last big detailed one we'll do will be right around here. Just be careful to use that sharp tip, make that line a little bit more pronounced. Okay. And And then the rest of these we can scribble in there. At this point, if you want to get rid of the marks that you made earlier for the quadrants, you can feel free to do that. Any of those measuring marks that are bothering you, you can fix that up, no big deal. Any mistakes that you made that you really, there we go.
Could I ask you a question, please?
Absolutely.
Do you think you could just take us through one tree? I'm trying very hard. I'll show you my trees.
Okay, well.
I just don't feel like I'm getting a great tree.
Let's take a look. That's actually not bad. Yeah.
It's not, but it's not as good as I like. Can we just do one tree together for a minute?
Yeah, sure,
Okay?
no problem, no problem. Also remember that we're recording it, so you can always rewatch it later. But yeah, we'll do one really quick together.
You're just moving real fast, so I can't really follow your hand.
I hear you. All right, so let's do one right here, right? We're gonna have to put a tree in here, right? We look at
Okay.
Photo.
Okay.
And what we're gonna do is just consider our reference for a bit. Okay, I have a good one for us. So we're gonna do one right here in the front. Okay, so what I'm going to put a dot to mark the top of the tree and a dot to mark the bottom of the tree, just like this. So now I know how high the tree is going to go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the top, and I'm just going to very loosely begin to create these alternating branches, just like this. Okay. And I'm doing it in a very, very simplified way because I'm going to fill in all of this blank space with marks after. But I really just want to I want to capture the profile of the tree, right? It's that nice conical shape. Okay. So if I leave it like this, it's going to feel too constructed, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my sharp pencil here. And I'm going to start by adding little extensions to those branches, just like this, tiny, tiny little extensions. And I don't want to be caught up in trying to distribute them evenly. In fact, I want them to be uneven on purpose. And if I'm filling in these little areas like this, then what's going to happen is the tree is going to get fuller. And I'm using a mixture of dots, so I'm pointing down on the page like that, but I'm also using the tip of the pencil to add these little extensions like that, okay? And there's going to be a little shadow space underneath the tree, so that'll just be a little darker. But start by giving those two dots some thought. You know, you want to measure that tree out, give those alternating branches a position, and then fill in between those alternating branches using a combination of dots and line making. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm doing that now.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. Cool. So now we have about 15 minutes together left. So I'm just going to quickly finish up this little area of grass right here, right? And it's not going to take me too long to finish this in, so I'll do that in a little bit later. But what I want to do with you now is I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to teach you some rapid drawing techniques or some speed sketching techniques that you can take with you on your hikes and when you're out in nature, or if you want to start a nature journal. I mentioned earlier to maybe bring a sketchbook to this workshop. Reason why is because if you keep your drawings all in one places, right, and it's really nice to have a theme too. If you keep all your drawings in one place and it's following a theme, and that theme happens to be nature, guess what? That's a nature journal. And we're going to work in a way that is totally, let's just say it's a very jarring technique because it's not about making a pretty picture. It's about getting as much information down as possible, right? You're thinking about how maybe a reporter would try to take notes and gather as much information as possible about a story they're trying to cover. We're going to do that, but with visual, a mixture of notes and visuals. So what I mean is this. We're going to work together, right? And here's something for you to consider as well. We're going to work together to develop our visual and sensory skills by trying to externalize our internal thought process, right? And again, we do that with notes, right? Just like we saw from our sketch in the very beginning with the conch shell, we added things like the location, the date, the measurements. Those are all quantifiable data points. But now, what if you were also writing down things like that you were feeling? Could be the mood you're in. It could be the weather that you're experiencing, if it's windy or if it's, you know, a perfect day and you're just happy to be there. By externalizing that thought process, you're now adding another layer of information to your drawings, right? And altogether, blending that experience into a visual representation is going to allow you to share that experience more fully with other people, or even just yourself when you find that drawing so many years later, right? So this is an example of a speed sketch that I did of a shorebird who was zigzagging around, moving its head back and forth, trying to catch little fish in the shallows, right? Obviously, this is not a drawing that would exemplify the caliber I am capable of as an artist. Instead, this is a way of visually telling a story. And I'm doing it in a very quick, rapid, and loose way. I'm not going for accuracy in terms of visual rendering. Instead, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to capture a moment. And I'm trying to explain to whoever's looking at this what was happening in this particular area at a given point in time. All right. So for our next exercise here, we're going to play a game. And if you've been in these classes before, you know what's coming. We're going to start a drawing by using our sensory skills first and then drawing later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my new piece of paper in half, right? Or you can use the back side of the piece of paper that you were using all along. And you're going to make a smaller rectangle. You're going to make two, actually. Okay, so I'm going to start with my regular big one, just like we did before. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line straight down the middle. Yeah, that's more like it. And I'm going to draw another, actually let's make 4 quadrants. So what we're doing now is we're setting ourselves up to make what we call thumbnail sketches. Now this is a great game to play when you're on a hike and you're out in nature. And this is something that we go over in our nature journaling class. Essentially, you want to take little snapshots of the things that you're experiencing while you're hiking or while you're out in nature, right? So for example, a perfect speed sketch of something, let's say a bird that I'm observing, would be very simply a very quick non-literal interpretation of a bird who is, let's say, hunting in the water. And behind the bird is a lot of tall grass. Okay, we remember how to draw grass from our last exercise. And also it's windy. Okay, we're gonna put the name of the location too. Okay, and now I just have a tiny little timestamp that took me all about 30 seconds to make, right? Very simple, it's almost like a comic. And the reason why it's important to do them really simple, like this, for example, let's say I'm on a mountain, I'm sitting down having lunch by a mountain, you know, got some vegetation around here, but I'm looking out and oh my gosh, look at these beautiful mountains. I want to capture this moment here. You know, what I'm doing is I'm basically just creating a tiny thumbnail sketch of a landscape that I'm seeing. Maybe there's a glacier that's in between these two mountains that's kind of coming down into this area. There's a lake. All right. And I have maybe the tree line only goes about this high up the mountain. Everything below that is rock. So this is a nice little way to also survey a landscape and just get different ideas down. Like for example, if I want to notice, like if I note the time, let's say it's 3 p.m. One question I might have is, how long till sunset, right? Or if I have another question like, how deep is this lake? I can write that down on my drawing just like this, and anybody who looks at this drawing will ask themselves the same questions. So if you're showing this to a friend or a family member and they go, oh, how deep was that lake? If you did the research and found out after, now you can tell them. And now you just shared a moment based on a tiny little thumbnail sketch that you did. Okay, so we're gonna play a game together. I'm gonna invite everybody to put their pencils down because we're gonna look at a video clip. I wish I could have taken you on a real hike, but this is the best we got for right now. I'm gonna share my screen with you. We're gonna look at a video, and we're only gonna look at the video, right? We're not going to draw. We're gonna look at the video for 20 seconds and try to absorb like a sponge as much information as possible. And then we're gonna draw from memory. I'm gonna take the video away and we're gonna try to draw everything we saw from memory and add little notes and things like that. Sounds crazy, but bear with me. You're gonna pick one of your little thumbnails here. You're not gonna draw yet. You're just gonna keep your hands on the table and you're gonna watch for 20 seconds, starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, look at this landscape that we have. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm noticing things like, oh, there's 2 waterfalls here, and they're sort of like on this cliff with a shelf, and it's going into a nice body of water that's sort of greenish. We have some trees growing near the water. I wonder what kind of trees those are. What's growing on the rocks? How are they growing on the rocks? Where's this waterfall coming from? Are there fish in the water? These are all things that you can consider as you're looking, and really just taking the time to enjoy that moment, to keep all distractions away and focus on the landscape is going to allow you to draw from memory, which we're going to do right now. Okay, so I'm going to share my top-down camera with you again, really quick. And from memory, I'm going to execute a drawing that doesn't have to be perfect in terms of its scale or proportion like we were worried about earlier. This is more about just getting information down on the page. Okay, getting information down on the page, just like this. Okay, we have these 2 waterfalls going down into the water, into the pond here. This would be a pond. Then again, how deep? That was a question we asked earlier. Where is the source of the waterfall? Plants growing on rocks. What kind are they? Right? And just very vaguely, very generally, we also have, is this a cave? That's another question to ask. Is there a cave down here? Maybe just shade in a little bit. But all in all, this very general thumbnail is done completely from memory, and it's something that we can share as part of our experience, right? So again, what did we see? I'll share the video screen again. Right? These are the observations that I made based on this sketch. Okay? And it's a really great way, again, to really hone in on the things that surround you in nature, right? Because we're going to do this exercise again. We're going to put 20 seconds on the clock again, and we're going to look for 20 seconds, but this time I'm going to let you draw at the exact same time, okay? So get ready, get your pencil in your hand, because we're going to have 20 seconds to draw and write notes and add a little bit of a story to this thumbnail that we're about to make. And we're going to start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, there we go. And there's another factor, sound. What are you hearing? That's another thing that you can add into your drawing. What audible senses or sounds are present? Windy. Ah. All right, maybe 20 seconds was too short. So what are some things we could add here? We have our lake. We have a little island over here with some trees growing on there, right? We have some grass. We also have some overhanging leaves that look like it's autumn, right? So we have brown leaves. And a cool thing is, if you add the date, right? Today's October 10th, 2020. If you find out what tree species has the brown leaves, then you're going to be able to understand a little bit better when to expect those leaves to be in peak foliage season, right? Because everybody in the northeast of the United States and other places where they have deciduous areas, you're always kind of in a marvelous display of color in the autumn. And what better way to enjoy that than by going up and admiring the peak foliage firsthand, right? So if you understand based on your little thumbnail sketch here, right, and we've been working on this sketch for a couple of minutes now, what we're doing is we're giving ourselves a timestamp, and we're linking this timestamp to an observation. If by October 10th the leaves are brown on this particular tree, perhaps the week before they were a brilliant yellow or an orange or a vibrant red, right? So this gives us the information we need in order to find when peak foliage season would be, okay? So what did you all see this time? I invite you all to send me an email, because class is ending very, very soon, with your drawings from the class. I would love to be able to be a resource for you and answer any questions that you have one-on-one. I have a couple of quick announcements to make before the end of our class today. So here is our slideshow again. Keep inspired, keep the ball rolling. I recommend that if you're feeling stuck about what to draw next, just go on a hike or spend some time outside and you'll find something, even if it's something really tiny like a flower or an insect, or something huge like a mountainscape. Spending time outside is the best way for you to find new ideas and to get inspired to draw. Also, I mentioned earlier about making drawing something that's very personal for you. If there's something you're really interested in, read up and become a subject matter expert on it. You know, I'm studying plants very, very thoroughly because I want to know, when I'm guiding hikes in the woods, what the difference between an oak tree and a maple is and why they're growing there and things like that. It gives me an opportunity to teach people what I've learned, which is what I would love for you to do as well. If you haven't already, maybe consider picking up a sketchbook and starting a nature journal. It's a great hobby, and it's something I've been doing for over a decade. And finally, if you want to find people who are interested in this stuff too, you have your classmates here. We have a group. It's on Facebook. You go to facebook.com/groups/hike and draw, and it's a place where I post drawings, offer discounts, and our community, we all draw together as well. So we have people from outside of class posting their drawings in this group, and it's a great way to find friends and also get good feedback on your drawing too. So this is our upcoming schedule. If you're interested in taking another workshop with us, I added some special ink drawing workshops because it is the month of October. I have a friend who's a guest artist who will be teaching an interesting twist on nature drawing. It's fantasy nature drawing, so he'll be showing you how to make beautiful hobbit homes and things like that from nature references. Also, we have a few spots left in our botanical drawing class, so if you're interested in learning how to draw plants in a scientific manner, that's where art meets science. So it's a great place for you to join us if you're interested. And if you really liked our last exercise, nature journaling, we'll be working on some more land surveying and some more science-based experiments we can do in the field as well. So for all other workshops, you can visit our website, www.hikeanddraw.nyc, for updates. And also, if you found us on Eventbrite, we're there as well. I thank you very much for spending this afternoon with me. It's been a pleasure. If you feel so inclined, if you enjoy this class, please feel free to leave a tip. And I hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
James.
you. We'll email you. Thank you. Bye.
You're
Thank
very
you.
welcome.
Fantastic. Very, very good. Excellent. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Very meditative.
I'm glad you liked it. I'll be looking forward to receiving everybody's drawings via email. No pressure. Again, I'll be sending a recording of this so you can rewatch later. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.